My friends and I, Alex, Mike, and Lisa, had been planning a camping trip for months. We were in our early 20s, full of excitement for a weekend of laughter and stories around the campfire. We chose a remote campsite at Pine Hollow, a place surrounded by dense woods and known for its isolation. The first night was perfect. We roasted marshmallows, shared ghost stories, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. But on the second night, things took a dark turn. Around midnight, as the fire crackled low, we heard it, a faint rustling in the woods. Mike, ever the brave one, smirked and stood up. "Probably just an animal," he said, grabbing a flashlight. He aimed the beam into the trees, but all we saw were swaying branches. "Let's not do this," Lisa said nervously. She'd always been cautious, and her voice had a quiver that made me uneasy. Mike shrugged and sat back down, but the sound didn't stop. The rustling turned into distinct, uneven footsteps. Someone was out there. "Hello?" Alex called out, trying to sound confident. The footsteps stopped, and silence enveloped us. We exchanged nervous glances, the crackle of the fire suddenly sounding too loud. Then, out of the darkness, a man emerged. His clothes were ragged, and his face was gaunt and hollow-eyed. He stumbled into the clearing, muttering incoherently, and then his eyes met ours. Lisa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Please," the man said, his voice low and strained. "You have to leave. They're coming." Before we could react, he collapsed, eyes wide open, body twitching once before going still. Panic set in as we tried to make sense of what was happening. Alex checked his pulse. Nothing. Mike was already dialing 911, but the signal was weak, and the call wouldn't connect. Then we heard it. More footsteps, quick and deliberate, surrounding us. Shadows moved between the trees, and whispers carried on the wind. I grabbed Lisa's hand, heart pounding as we huddled together. A branch snapped behind us, and Mike turned, flashlight shaking. In its beam, we saw another figure, watching from the trees, face half covered by a dirty bandana. The whispers turned to shouts, and suddenly figures emerged, rushing toward us. We bolted, sprinting through the woods, tripping over roots and branches. I heard Lisa cry out as she fell, but I pulled her up, adrenaline driving us forward. We made it to the ranger station at dawn, breathless and bloody from our flight. When the rangers searched the site, they found no sign of the man or the figures that chased us, only trampled grass and footprints leading deep into the forest. Weeks later, we learned that Pine Hollow had once been a hideout for a group that hunted campers for sport. Most had been caught years ago, but not all. I still hear the whispers in my nightmares, and I'll never forget the terror in that man's eyes when he warned us. Number 2. It was late August, and my friends Sam, Jake, and I had driven out to Oak Hollow Campground for one last summer trip before starting college. The campsite was secluded, surrounded by dense woods and a winding river that shimmered under the moonlight. It was the kind of place where the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. The first night was peaceful, filled with laughter and the crackle of our campfire. We stayed up swapping stories and sharing beers until the stars seemed to blur above us. Just as the fire burned low, I thought I heard a branch snap. I froze, my ears straining to catch the noise again, but Jake laughed, throwing another log onto the fire. "Relax, man. It's just the forest," Jake said, smirking as he took a long sip from his beer. "Yeah, or Bigfoot," Sam added with a chuckle, nudging me with his elbow. I tried to laugh it off, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up, a warning I couldn't shake. We eventually crawled into our tents, the forest engulfing us in a thick silence. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't the usual rustle of leaves or chirp of crickets. It was a slow, dragging shuffle, like someone was walking just outside the tent. My breath hitched, and I lay perfectly still, ears straining. A metallic scraping sound joined the footsteps, sending a chill down my spine. I wanted to call out to Sam or Jake, but my voice caught in my throat. The footsteps circled my tent, and I could see the shadow of boots outlined by the faint moonlight. "Sam? Jake?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No response. The shadow lingered for a moment before the footsteps continued toward Sam's tent. I heard a muffled curse, followed by a quick rustle as Sam unzipped his tent. "Who's out there?" Sam's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. Silence. "Don't mess around, man. It's not funny." He stepped out, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the dark, catching movement at the edge of the clearing. A figure stood there, just beyond the reach of the light. It shifted slightly, and the metallic scraping returned. "Get back in the tent," I hissed, my heart pounding. Sam ignored me, taking a cautious step forward. "Hey, if you need help, say something." The figure didn't move. Suddenly, Jake burst out of his tent, armed with a camping hatchet. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, eyes darting between us and the shadow. The figure turned and disappeared into the woods without a sound. The three of us stood frozen, the only noise our ragged breathing and the distant river. Finally, Jake spoke. "Pack up. We're leaving at first light." Morning couldn't come fast enough. As we gathered our things, Sam found a small, rusted knife lying in the dirt, the blade chipped and stained. "This was what I heard," he said, voice trembling. We followed a trail of deep footprints leading from our tents into the woods. They were deliberate, each step heavy and distinct. We packed up without another word and drove back in silence. Later, we learned that a man wanted for breaking into remote campsites had been spotted not far from Oak Hollow. He hadn't hurt anyone yet, they said, but we knew we'd come far too close to being his first.